keys to the house. I got to go in.
Yeah,
I got to be ready. And there you go. So thank you.
that's powerful. I mean, this stuff is really, really, really intense. I mean, this is why I think these kinds of thoughts, the mindset of how you run your business is going to make the difference between whether you stay in business or you get out. And when you're an entrepreneur, there are all kinds of things that are that are running against you. They're going that are stacked against you, right? Entrepreneurship is not easy because at the end of the day, the hardest part is accountability, right? That's really the hardest part. It's one of the hardest challenges that anyone has is accountability. It's this idea that I am the only person that I'm accountable to, which means that I can let myself not be. I can say, oh, you know what? I'll do it tomorrow, right? You can't do that at a job. You can't tell your boss, I'll take care of it later, right? You'll get fired, but you won't fire yourself for doing the same thing. So, entrepreneurship is tough. So I think that is something that I think this is why these things are ultimately impactful. So, all right, so let's get into what's happening in the real estate market. So, we're seeing some activity. First and foremost, the news specifically relating to interest rates. So, the president made a request for the Fed to adjust interest rates, right? That is something that the president did put into place. But the president doesn't really have control of interest rates. He can make the request, but it's really up to the Fed to decide how they're going to proceed. In this case, they are not. They're holding, right? They are not making a specific change at this time. They're just basically kind of holding fast and seeing how things go. Their mindset, based on some interviews that I saw, is that they kind of want to see how some of the tariff elements are going to be impactful to the economy. Just some of the other economic changes that the president and his administration are going to be doing. So they're kind of in a wait and see position. So that suggests that we're not likely to see any kind of huge changes with regard to interest rates. And that's going to apply across. This is specifically as it relates to the Fed, but typically there is, even though it's not a direct correlation, there's usually some connectivity between what the Fed has in terms of interest rates and what we see for mortgage rates, right? So this is going to ultimately have an impact in the real estate market. So just having an understanding of that is going to be important for you guys as professionals in this industry to understand, right? This is the interest rates, as far as the Fed is concerned, it doesn't sound like they plan on having any major changes, though there is a suggestion from the Fed that they're likely to go ahead and make some small adjustments in the spring. So we may see some small adjustments in the spring, and then it's possible that we might see another adjustment going into the fall. So, but as it stands, I don't anticipate that being anything major. It'll probably be relatively minor, but it's all going to be dependent on how they see the economy going and whether or not they feel that an adjustment is going to benefit the local economy. So that is the position of the Fed. So if anyone's asking about interest rates, I mean, right now, there's not any indicators that we're going to see any major changes with interest rates. There may be a slight, like I said, a slight dip in interest rates over the next 3 to 6 months, but the likelihood is not going to be terribly heavy. So that being said, make sure that you educate your clients on what that means for them, right? Remember that interest rates will change all the time. The home values right now are still holding pretty steady. We looked at the November numbers last time, and then we also looked at some of the December numbers. And what we're seeing in terms of activity, let me actually bring some of that up. Let me see here. Oops. what we're seeing in terms of activity for the December numbers is that this is sales. Yeah. Okay. What we're seeing with December numbers is that there's a slight uptick in active listings month over month, with a 24% uptick in listings year over year. New listings were down month over month, which is not uncommon for December, for listings to be down month over month between November and December. But overall, listings were still up year over year. So last December versus this December. Pending sales were down in December by 13%, but were up by about 1% year over year. Listings sold were up 21%, which is actually pretty good. It looks like listings sold outpaced new listings coming on the market, which actually has an impact in the months of inventory. So we did see a little bit of a downtick with regard to months of inventory. In November, we were at about 5.9 months of inventory, and in December, we're looking at 4.9 months of inventory. So that suggests that there's probably a little bit of confidence in the market, where people are a little bit more comfortable purchasing, for December. Hopefully that trend continues going into the year, which again is not uncommon, during an election year, for there to be some pent up demand just before an election, and then just after the election, there's a little bit of a push of activity that happens. The question is whether or not that will continue over time. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you guys is the historic sales year over year between 2019 and 2024. So there were some interesting things that I found here. So I went back in time and looked at what kind of activity was happening in 2019, 2020, 2021, all the way to 2024 in terms of sales. And what I found was that between 19 and 2020, there was about a 6% increase in the number of sales that happened between 2019 and 2020. And then in 2021, there was another 8.5% increase, roughly. And then 2022 was the year that it just went bonkers, right? And we saw almost a 15%. I'm sorry, in 2021 is when it went bonkers. So we saw that 8%. In 2022, we saw a pullback, right? So we saw about a 15% pullback in the number of homes that were sold in 2022. Now, when we get to 2023, we start seeing a little bit of a pullback again. But now in 2024, even though it's roughly even, it starts to kind of pop up again. And if you look at the numbers in terms of total sales in 2024 versus going back to 2019, the number of homes sold is pretty close. Still a little higher in 2019 versus 2024. But you can see that the numbers are getting close again, right? We're starting to see about the same number of homes sold in 2019 as we saw in 2024. Now, 2024 was still less, but it was interesting to see that the number of homes, if you look at on average per month, was about the same in 2019 as it is in 2024, and the total number of sales was pretty close as well. So basically, we're seeing about the same number of sales in 2024 last year as we saw in 2019. That wasn't much of a difference. But the difference, the big differentiator between the two is, if you look at this, this is basically the number of listings that are available. That were available back in now my data was only able to go back to 2020, but you can see in 2020 the total number of listings was 984,000 in 2020. And if you look at 2024, the total number of listings was 1.3 million. So you can see there was a huge difference between those two markets, right? So even though 2019 had a similar number of sales that occurred that as 2024, the number of homes that are available in 2024 is substantially higher. One could also argue that there's likely that there is a higher number of people who live in the community this past year versus in 2019, because people have been coming here. We've seen about 1,000-ish people come to Florida per day. So there's definitely more people that live here versus in 2019. So, there's a similar number of transactions happening, but the challenge that we're running into is that we just have a lot more inventory that's currently on the market, with a lot more people that are in the market, and they're choosing not to sort of make a move right now. And of course, a lot of that has to do with interest rates, home values, and stuff like that. Those things are definitely a factor. If you look at the average home price as of December, we're looking at 463 as the average home price. In 2019, that number was substantially lower. And with interest rates also being higher, the cost per month to actually have to purchase a home is much higher. So even if you found a home that was similar in price, the cost of that home per month is higher because interest rates are higher. So these are factors that we need to make sure that we get clarity on, and we are able to clearly convey specifically to our sellers, because they need to understand some of the challenges that exist in the market. And they need to understand that there are things that, homes are still selling. It's just that there's a lot of competition that they're having to compete against, and that they're going to have to be willing to understand that it may take a little longer to sell their home. They may have to take some extra steps to get it sold. There may be some extra things they may want to do in terms of like staging, professional photographs and video, like other marketing elements to showcase the home in the best light. And they got to be willing to also concede on a few things. In 2021, if you had a home to sell before buying, a lot of sellers just didn't take those deals, primarily because there were so many buyers in the market. In this market, we're not going to see that, right? Where sellers are probably much more, not probably, they are much more willing to allow a buyer to go ahead and get their property sold before they purchase. And we're seeing that both on the residential side as well as the commercial side. So, it is important that you guys have a good understanding of the dynamics of this market. So you guys can really make sure that you can convey that to your clients. And this is all data that I think would be good to share in general in a newsletter, or just, to be aware of, right? And again, you can get as into the weeds as you want with this. It's up to you how deep in the weeds you want to get with this. As it relates to your clients, just remember, the deeper in the weeds you get, sometimes the harder it is for the client to really, connect with you, because, we start getting into some of the jargon and stuff like that. And sometimes that can get a little confusing. But it is important that you guys are paying attention to the data that's here, because it allows you as a professional to be able to share this information as an advisor to your seller, as an advisor to your buyer, so that they can understand what the dynamics of the market is and what their position in the market is, so that they can, be able to be successful in whatever goal that they have, whether that's buying or selling or both, as it relates to the market. Okay. You guys have any questions as it relates to what I'm sharing with you right now?
Where can you get a copy of that?
So this data here can actually be brought up through MLS. So if you go into MLS and you go under stats, so if you log into MLS, into Matrix, and then at the top you have My Matrix, Search, Stats, Tax, Link, blah, blah, blah. If you go into Stats, you can go in and look at historic count of active listings. It gives you average days on market versus list price median. It gives you historic sales by year, historic sale price trends, all that good stuff. And then you can look at either a chart or you can look at data, and then you can export that data as a CSV if you want to manipulate it and get additional information. So for example, the data that they provided did not include monthly averages, total listings, and the change. I did additional math to create that, right? I just did the average of the numbers above it, the sum total of the numbers above it, and then what the change was from one year to the next. And that gave me the average. So you may have to manipulate it a little bit to get more insight on what the data means. But the data is available for you on MLS. And remember that data tends to be about 30 days behind. So just keep that in mind. It's trailing about 30 days. But that is, again, insight that is important for you guys to just be familiar with, so that you can provide that consultation and be that advisor to your client, whether they're a buyer or seller.
So with that data, can you filter it towards your market, like your neighborhood, and just get the same information just for the neighborhood? Because I know there's smart plans that allow you to give your clients monthly reports. So, I mean, is this the same thing? Like I could tailor it to my neighborhood?
Well, it can't really be tailored. Well, I guess it does have legal subdivision, so it's possible that it could be tailored towards a specific subdivision. So that looks like it does have that capacity. Oh, all right. Let's do that.
You're echoing.
Yeah. So you could, it looks like you can put a subdivision, assuming that a subdivision is in there. But and then you could also do within a range, like within a half a mile of some address, right? So you can do that as well. So this would be a little bit bigger picture view versus the data that you send via command, for example, with a neighborhood, right? So the command identifies specific things that are happening in the neighborhood right now. And then this is like going back in history to kind of look at what the trends are. And the reason why the trends are important is because the trends help you to provide insight on how things are moving, where things are trending. Because then what you can do with a trend, if you see something that's trending a certain way, then you can anticipate, you can at least make an attempt to anticipate where it's likely to go, so that you can go ahead and make sure that you're either pricing right, you're listing doing the thing that you need to do on your listing to get it sold quickly. You are preparing your buyer for what they can expect as it relates to how the trends are moving, right? And you can just make sure that you're setting everyone up for what's going to happen. This is going to be really good. Like if a seller really wants to sell for much higher than what the market is demanding, and you're providing trends to show that, hey, as much as I'd love to sell it for this price, the trend is not showcasing that this is the right number. Even if you were to test that number, which is fine, you can test that number. If indeed the test does not prove successful, you have data to show that you would have already shown them that, hey, this is why it wasn't successful. That it's not trending in that direction. This is why we recommend, let's say it's a list price change or staging or whatever it is you're going to be recommending to make sure you get the property sold. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So So that's the data. All right. Now let's get into. Do you have any other questions about data before we continue? Okay.
No, thank you.
All right. Awesome. Okay, so for next week, we had a great week this week. So we went over the listing agreement. Here's the thing that I'm going to say. I've been getting a lot of questions about compensation as it relates to different transactions. Please make sure that you have clarity on how compensation is managed, and your discussion with your client as it relates to compensation. Okay, this is not something that you want to kind of know. You need to have absolute clarity on how you're going to be having conversations about compensation, what that looks like in the various documents that we have, and then making sure that you're able to explain that in a way that is going to be clear and concise for the person that you're working with. because if you don't get that right, that can get you into a lot of trouble. So it's really important that, the NAR settlement, made some changes so that we can be a little bit more clear with how compensation is handled. And there are still a lot of agents out there that do not have clarity on what compensation means for them. So there's no way they would have clarity on what compensation means or be able to translate that to a client if they themselves don't understand how compensation works. Okay. So the biggest thing that I've been getting a lot of I guess a lot of things that are not clear for is specifically related to Section 10C of the listing agreement that identifies that the seller is not offering compensation, right? The seller is not offering compensation. Get clarity on what that means. Remember, the seller not offering compensation does not equate to the seller is completely unwilling to pay compensation. Okay. So they're just not wanting to offer that compensation to a buyer. If a buyer wants to make an offer of compensation, then they can have that conversation, and maybe they come to the conclusion that they're not offering compensation at the end. Maybe they come to the conclusion that they're agreeable to the compensation the agent has presented. So that has been one of the things that I've been hearing the most confusion about is, oh, the seller's not willing to pay compensation. That is not what 10C says. It says the seller is not offering compensation. They're not willing to put an offer out for what compensation is. That means the buyer's agent has to put an offer of what they would like compensation to be and negotiate that with the seller. And hopefully they can come to an agreement somewhere. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you ask a listing agent before the showing if the seller is offering seller's concession?
Can you ask that question one more time?
Can you ask the listing agent before the showing if the seller is offering seller's concession?
Seller's concession or compensation?
Seller's concession towards the house, towards the buyer. Seller's concession. Is it the same thing?
You can because the listing agreement does have a new provision that was added that allows the seller and listing agent to identify a pre-agreed concession. So if they put that in there, then they would be permitted to share that. So you can ask that question for sure. Oftentimes
She did not respond. She only told me like 2.5%. I asked her, is the seller offering any seller's concession and what is the commission?
yeah.
And her only response was 2.5. That's it, nothing else.
So there's a good chance that she probably didn't negotiate any seller concessions. So that's going to be up to you to do that as part of the contract process.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay. So
Yeah.
if she's only responding with the compensation component but didn't respond to the concession component, then most agents don't negotiate concessions ahead of time, right?
Okay.
That's not typically negotiated ahead of time. Now, it's not a bad idea to have that. There may be a good idea to do that. So an example that I think would be a good opportunity to have that conversation with the seller on is if you are selling a home in a new construction community where they're still building new construction, and the new construction community already has concessions that they have built into their sales, and then now you have a resale that's in the same community. You may want to talk to your seller ahead of time and say, hey, listen, I want to make sure we get this home sold, but our competition, which is the new construction right up the street, is selling this same model and they're offering closing cost concessions. I think it might be a good idea for us to consider also offering closing cost concessions. So that way, any buyers coming in will be looking at this as apples to apples as much as possible, right? So that may be a situation where it might have a strategic advantage to have that seller concession negotiated on the front end. And then while we can't put that on MLS, we can discuss that with any agents who call. We can put it on other marketing materials that concessions are being offered to the buyer towards their closing costs, all that good stuff. We can include that in our other marketing materials. So under those circumstances, that may be a situation where it makes sense to negotiate concessions ahead of time, because then you can make that part of your marketing materials to try to attract more buyers to that home compared to new construction, as an example.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
But I would say that unless there's another scenario that is like that. Oh, I think we just lost Ann. But unless there's another scenario that's like that, it might be challenging to negotiate closing cost concessions, because most of the time the seller is going to want to wait for an offer to come in to then negotiate closing cost concessions at that time, right? So anyways, to her question, if you can call the listing agent and inquire if there are any concessions and if compensation is included, because if they've already pre-negotiated compensation broker to broker, they are required to share that. And if they have negotiated compensation, get her, make sure she gets in. Okay, so if they've negotiated concessions, they have to go ahead and reveal that. If they've negotiated compensation broker to broker, they do have to reveal that. If they've negotiated compensation seller to broker, they have to reveal that. The only time they don't have to reveal anything is if they don't have information. Like they in that situation, most likely is because the seller selected 10C and there is nothing being offered as it relates to compensation. That would be the time that they don't have any obligation to share anything, even if they may know the seller is willing to offer compensation, right? But if their listing agreement states that no compensation is being offered, then they have no obligation to share anything that they know about compensation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ann, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. Go ahead.
You're talking compensation, but the concessions, I mean, 10C talks about compensation, I think.
Correct.
So if that's checked, then that has nothing to do with whether or not we talk about concessions. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. 10C is compensation and has nothing to do with concession. So if there can be a separate concessions conversation that you can have with the listing agent, but typically that's only if the listing agent has already pre-negotiated some concessions as part of the listing agreement, right?
Okay.
So if you look at, let me just see here. Listing agreement.
Because you said if there has been negotiations, it must be disclosed unless.
Yeah, so if they've already negotiated concessions, for example, so if you look at the listing agreement, right, under 3C, under 3C, there's a seller's expenses. The seller will pay mortgage discount, other closing costs, or concessions not to exceed some amount, and any other expenses seller agrees to pay in connection with a transaction. So 3C is a relatively new component where you can pre-negotiate how much the seller is willing to offer out in concessions for the buyer's closing costs. And remember, concessions is not treated the same as compensation. So if you, for example, are working with a lender and there is compensation being discussed of, let's say hypothetically 3% as an example. Obviously you guys negotiate whatever it is that you think is reasonable, but let's say it's hypothetically 3%. If you guys have that 3% and then the lender only permits 3% towards closing costs, right? Well, that 3% that you've negotiated for compensation does not apply towards against the 3% that the lender is permitting the seller to pay towards closing costs. You can still do additional 3% towards closing costs. You guys understand?
Yeah.
The closing cost is a concession.
Correct. That is a concession.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So did that provide some clarity for you guys?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
Awesome. So, all right. So we had some really great sessions this week for some of that. So remember, Thursdays is the day that we talk about, we go through agreements and contracts. So if you do have any questions or you're not clear on something as it relates to agreements and contracts, Thursday's the day to come. All right, so for next week, we're going to be doing our regular lead gen in the morning. Again, I think that's a great opportunity for you to just jump on and just make that sort of a committed time to be doing your lead gen, assuming that you have that carved out, you have the capability of attending those. That's not a class. That's just a, hey, I'm going to lead gen with everyone else. And then at the end of that lead gen session, we talk about how many people did we actually have conversation with, any appointments that were set, those kinds of things, so that we can all kind of celebrate some, even the small wins, right? Mondays is our day for, having conversations. So if you have any concerns about conversion, what kind of conversations to have, make sure you come on Mondays. There is, in terms of new stuff, there is going to be a ALC culture and social committee meeting on Tuesday. That's not on the calendar, or rather the email that I sent out to you guys, because it's not PC related. But if you do have an interest in being part of the culture and social committee, then that is going to be at 9 o'clock on Tuesday. Otherwise, we have our lead gen at that time, and then we have our coaching, which is going to be starting at 10:30. Okay. If you know anyone who's looking to or interested in being in real estate, Tuesday of next week is going to be our career night. So that starts at 3:30. I guess they should be really called career afternoon, considering it starts at 3:30. But that's going to be at 3:30. And then, of course, for those of you who want to get into more into understanding how campaigns work in Command, we do have in Command Your Business on Wednesday. Mike is going to be covering campaigns and marketing your business. So that'll be a really good one. And then we have our team meeting at 12:30. So make sure that you attend that. That's going to be the next team meeting before family reunion. So there may be some conversation about family reunion that might be relevant for you guys. Otherwise, the rest of the week is going to go as per normal, with again our contracts and agreements session at 10:30, and then 11:30. We're going to be getting into. I'm going to be covering CMAs at 11:30. So if you want a refresher on how to do a CMA, that's going to be Thursday at 11:30. If you want to do that. Okay. So that's what next week looks like. Do you guys have any questions before I let you guys go?
Yeah, I have a great story to tell you guys, and then I have to run after that.
Okay.
So a gentleman called me last week. He says his friend handed him my business card and says, the Sims, you have to work with the Sims. They are great people.
Okay.
The Sims, he said he worked with the Sims from Haiti and he never have any disappointment. So I said, I appreciate you calling me. However, I am not from Haiti and Sims is my married name.
Mm.
And he says, you know what? I want to work with you because you're honest.
Mm.
He says, I want to work with you. You didn't have to say all that, but you said it. It's your married name. You wasn't born Sims and you're not from Haiti. You're from Jamaica.
Yeah.
And he says, I love your honesty.
That's awesome.
And I'm going to meet him today. It's going to be a cash purchase.
Okay.
It's like, you just never know where your lead is coming from.
Yeah.
You just never know. And it was like, it was like, it was an offer. It was like,
That's
honesty
awesome.
is the best thing, all the time.
Oh yeah.
And I really appreciate that. So that's my story.
That's awesome. Integrity matters. Integrity matters. And that's a perfect example of that. That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.
I'm on my way to meet with him now. So
okay.
That's the 2.5%. That's the 2.5 I was talking about.
I gotcha. So. All right. Well, good luck.
All right. Thank you.
All right then. All right. Bye-bye. You too. Bye-bye. Bonnie, did you have anything that you wanted to chat about before we close out?
Not really. I'm just got things in the wings, and I'm trying to bring everything together. I'm focused on 5 different leads.
Yeah.
Well, not leads, but opportunities.
Perfect.
I'll be in touch for sure.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, listen, go out there, go and get that business. I know you're doing a great job, so I'm looking forward to hearing more of the activity that you got going on. So thank you for joining us, and hopefully I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Gus. I appreciate your encouragement.
Absolutely. Take care.